They said her career was over. One brutal injury-riddled season, and everyone moved on. The headlines stopped. The hype train found a new favorite. And then, out of nowhere, Caitlyn Clark came back and did something no one saw coming. Something that is now forcing the entire WNBA to rewrite its own record books in real time. But here's the part nobody is talking about yet. There is one number buried in her 2026 stat line that changes everything about how we should be looking at this season. And I am not telling you what it is until the very end of this video. So if you skip ahead, you will miss it completely. Before we get into this, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel exists because of people like you who actually care about the real story behind the stat sheet, not just the headlines. It costs nothing, it takes 2 seconds, and it genuinely helps this channel keep going. All right, let's get into it. Let's start with where we actually are right now, because the numbers alone tell a story most people have completely missed. Caitlyn Clark is having what can only be described as the best season of her professional career. She is averaging a career-best 21.4 points per game, along with 3.8 rebounds and 7.9 assists across 32.8 minutes a night. This is not a rookie riding a wave of hype anymore. This is a third-year professional putting up numbers that put her in the conversation with the very best players in the league. And here's what makes it even more remarkable. This is coming directly off the back of an injury-riddled previous season. A season where doubters lined up to say she had already peaked, that the league had adjusted to her, that the Clark effect was cooling off. Instead, she took care of her body, worked on her game, and came back throwing haymakers. Just recently, in a win over the Seattle Storm, Clark and teammate Kelsey Mitchell combined for 60 points to lead the Fever to a road victory, pushing Indiana's record to 18 wins and 10 losses. That is not a fluke. That is a team peaking at exactly the right time. But stick with me here, because there is a deeper story developing underneath these box scores, one involving a rivalry that has been building for over a year. And it is about to boil over again. I will get to that in a few minutes, and trust me, you do not want to miss what happened between these two players last summer. Let's talk about the bigger picture first, because the second half of the 2026 season did not just start quietly, it started with an explosion of momentum. The Indiana Fever have won 8 of their last 10 games. Think about that stretch for a second. In a league this competitive, in a league where former MVPs and championship rosters are fighting for playoff positioning every single night, winning 8 out of 10 is not a hot streak. That is a statement. And ESPN Analytics noticed. Following the All-Star break, ESPN released updated championship probabilities, and the Indiana Fever landed at the very top of the list, a 24.1% chance to win the title, ahead of even the reigning champions, the Las Vegas Aces, who sit at 22.6%. Read that again. The team many people had written off after a rough previous season is now the betting favorite to win it all. Now, before you get too comfortable, there is a warning sign buried in that same report, something that could completely derail this Fever title run if it isn't fixed. I am going to come back to that in a moment because it directly threatens everything they have built this season, and I think you need to hear exactly how serious it is. Let's talk about Coach Stephanie White for a second, because her fingerprints are all over this turnaround. She has built a roster around elite offense, and it shows. The Fever have one of the most explosive offensive units in the league this year. Clark running the show, Kelsey Mitchell providing instant scoring off pull-up jumpers and floor spacing, Aaliyah Boston anchoring the interior. This is a team that can simply outscore you on a given night. But offense without discipline is a double-edged sword, and that is exactly the crack analysts are pointing to. The Fever have already conceded 100 or more points on 9 separate occasions this season. One more triple-digit defensive collapse ties a WNBA record for the most times a single team has allowed 100 points in a season. Let that sink in. The same team sitting at the top of the championship odds is also on the verge of tying a record for defensive futility. So here is the real question hanging over Indiana right now, and it is the one nobody has a clean answer for. Can an offense this explosive actually cover for a defense this leaky once the playoffs start and possessions get tighter, the pace slows down, and every single mistake gets magnified under pressure? Keep that question in your head, because I promise you, it comes up again before this video is over. Now let's get into the individual brilliance, because Clark has not just been good this season, she has been making WNBA history on a near-weekly basis. In one recent outburst against the Seattle Storm, Clark exploded for 45 points in a single game. During that same performance, she became the fastest player in WNBA history to reach 200 career three-pointers. Fastest ever. Not fastest rookie, fastest player, period, in the history of the league. She has scored over 30 points in a game 4 separate times this season, and she has shot better than 50% from three-point range in 3 of her last 5 outings. This is a player who, less than a year ago, was being written off by people who assumed injuries would define her career. Instead, she has turned this season into one of the most efficient offensive stretches by any guard in recent WNBA memory. And this brings us to the moment I promised you earlier, the rivalry. Because Clark's road to the playoffs is not just about beating good teams. It is about one very specific player who has history with her, and that history is not just competitive. It got physical. Marina Mabrey, now playing for the Toronto Tempo, shares what can only be described as a loaded past with Caitlyn Clark. Last June, when the Indiana Fever faced off against the Connecticut Sun, Clark and Mabrey were involved in an infamous physical altercation on the court, the kind of moment that gets replayed for years and defines a rivalry long after the final score is forgotten. And now, in 2026, Mabrey is not fading into the background. She has come out swinging in her new role with the Toronto Tempo, putting up huge performances alongside her backcourt partner Brittney Sykes. In one game against the Phoenix Mercury, Mabrey and Sykes made history as the first duo in league history to each score 30 points in a game during a franchise's inaugural season. These two have been nicknamed the $1 Million Backcourt after becoming the first pairing to sign $1 million contracts under the league's newest collective bargaining agreement. So think about what that means. The player who once got into a physical confrontation with Caitlyn Clark is no longer some fringe roster piece. She is now co-leading one of the most dangerous new backcourts in the league on a franchise that is making noise in its very first season. If these two teams cross paths again this year, and given playoff seeding, that is entirely possible. You are looking at one of the most anticipated, most tension-filled matchups the WNBA has seen in years. Now here's something that connects directly back to everything we just talked about. The league itself is under real pressure. WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert recently held a virtual meeting with the Players' Union Executive Committee, specifically to discuss what more can be done to protect players from online harassment. This is not a minor administrative footnote. This is the commissioner of the league directly acknowledging that the intensity, the rivalries, the spotlight, all of it has created a genuine problem the league now has to actively manage. Which raises a question worth sitting with for a second. As the spotlight on players like Clark and Mabrey grows bigger and bigger, is the league doing enough to protect the players caught in the middle of it? That is a conversation that is only going to get louder as this season moves toward the playoffs. Let's zoom out for a moment and talk about where the MVP race stands, because this is where things get genuinely unpredictable. Despite everything we just covered, The historic scoring nights, the record-breaking three-point milestone, the Fever's surge to the top of the championship odds, Clark is still not the frontrunner for MVP. She currently sits behind A'ja Wilson, Paige Bueckers, and Olivia Miles in the odds, even after her recent hot stretch. Now stop and think about that for a second, because it tells you something important about the depth of talent in this league right now. This is not a case of one dominant superstar running away with everything. This is a legitimate, wide-open race between multiple players who are all putting up historic numbers in the same season. A'ja Wilson has been the standard for years. Paige Bueckers has emerged as one of the most complete two-way threats in the league. Olivia Miles has quietly built an MVP-caliber case of her own. So here's the debate I want you to sit with. If Clark keeps up this pace, the efficiency, the record-breaking scoring nights, the fact that she is directly responsible for the Fever's rise to the top of the championship odds, does the MVP conversation have to shift? Or does true dominance in this league now require doing what Wilson, Bueckers, and Miles have done night after night without the same level of spotlight? I want you to think about that because I am coming back to it before we wrap up. Let's talk about the supporting cast for a second, because championship teams are never built around one player alone, and Indiana knows this better than most. Kelsey Mitchell has been arguably the most consistent second option in the entire league this season. In one recent blowout win over the Las Vegas Aces, yes, the defending champions, Mitchell and Sophie Cunningham both posted over 20 points in a dominant 109-75 victory. Beating the defending champions by that margin is not a statement you make by accident. Aaliyah Boston continues to anchor the front court, and there has even been public debate among analysts about whether she or Mitchell might have a stronger MVP case than Clark herself, given how much they contribute on both ends of the floor. That debate alone tells you how deep this roster has become. This is not a one-woman show. This is a legitimate title contender with three players who could each be an all-star anchor on a different team. But here is where the tension comes back in, because depth like this comes with its own pressure. The report on Indiana's championship odds specifically noted that if Clark, Mitchell, or Boston has an off night, the entire operation could be in serious trouble. A team this reliant on its top three scorers is one bad shooting night away from a first-round upset. And in the WNBA playoffs, one bad night is sometimes all it takes. So let's bring this back to the number I promised you at the very beginning of this video. The one buried in Clark's stat line that changes how we should be reading this entire season. It's her assist number, 7.9 assists per game. Read that next to her 21.4 points, and you start to see something most people are missing in all the highlight reels and viral clips. This is not just a scoring season. This is a season where Clark is running an offense that puts up triple-digit numbers almost every single night, while also being the single biggest reason the Fever's defense is under so much scrutiny. Because when your best player is orchestrating that much offense, the trade-offs on the other end become impossible to ignore. That tension, historic offensive production paired with a defense flirting with a league record for futility, is going to define whether this Fever team actually wins a championship or becomes one of the most talked about near misses in recent WNBA history. So here's what I want to leave you with. The Indiana Fever are sitting at the top of the championship odds. Caitlyn Clark is playing the best basketball of her career and rewriting the record books in real time. A loaded rivalry with Marina Mabrey and the Toronto Tempo is simmering just beneath the surface, and an MVP race featuring 4 legitimate contenders is heading into its final stretch with no clear favorite. Every single one of these storylines is about to collide as the playoffs approach, which means the next few weeks of this season might end up being the most important stretch of Caitlyn Clark's career so far. If this breakdown gave you something to think about, do me a favor and hit that like button and drop a comment telling me who you think takes home MVP this year. I read every single one. And if you want to be here the moment this rivalry boils over again, make sure you are subscribed because when it happens, you are not going to want to find out about it a day late.